The sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel rang out, piercing through the packed hall of the Silver Creek Community Center. 7-year-old Erina clutched a pink ceramic piggy bank tightly in her small arms, the coins inside jingling faintly. Tears blurred her vision as her heart pounded loudly in her chest. $40, the auctioneer called, his voice booming with authority. Do I hear 45? Erina's trembling gaze swept across the crowd, watching bidding paddles rise one after another, each motion tearing apart the last fragile shreds of hope in her heart. Across the room, standing quietly among the crowd, was Rex, the German shepherd who had once been the loyal partner of Erina's late father. Rex's intelligent eyes scanned the room anxiously, and then suddenly locked onto the small form of the little girl. Without warning, as if pulled by an invisible force, Rex jerked hard on his leash, forcing the handler to yank him back. A small but urgent whimper escaped from Rex's throat, drawing curious glances from those nearby. Margaret, Erina's mother, gently pulled her daughter close, wrapping an arm around her as fresh tears spilled down the little girl's cheeks. This auction wasn't just about buying a dog. For Erina, it was the last thread that connected her to her late father, Deputy Sheriff David, who had died in the line of duty 5 years ago. Since the tragedy, Erina hadn't spoken a single word to anyone, except to Rex. Erina sat quietly by the window in her bedroom, her vacant eyes staring out at the thin blanket of snow covering Silver Creek. The room was filled with memories, every object a silent piece of the once happy past. Her tiny hand gently stroked an old stuffed animal, its button eyes faded from years of being held close. From the doorway, Margaret stood silently, watching her daughter, her heart aching. 5 years had passed, but the pain of losing David, her husband, Erina's father, and the soul of their family, still felt like a fresh wound that refused to heal. David and Rex, his K-9 partner, had once been a beloved sight throughout the town of Silver Creek. Margaret remembered that dark day as if it had happened yesterday. A mission that should have been simple, a routine drug bust, had quickly spun out of control. David was killed, and though Rex survived, it was as if he'd left part of his soul behind in that chaos. From that moment on, Erina sank into silence, speaking to no one, except Rex, the only companion who truly understood her. In the years following the tragedy, Margaret tried each day to keep their little family from falling apart. 2 years later, Rick Thompson came into their lives, bringing a bit of stability, a bit of warmth. At first, Margaret had hoped Rick's presence would help revive Erina. But Rick never truly understood the bond between the girl and Rex. To him, Rex was nothing more than a burden, an anchor that kept Erina tied to the pain of the past. One night, Margaret happened to overhear Rick whispering on the phone in the kitchen. She stood still outside the doorway, heart pounding, as she heard him mention the name James Hammond. James Hammond, the head of a private security corporation, was the very man now eyeing Rex. "I'll try to talk Margaret into it," Rick said quietly, tension in his voice, "but I can't promise anything." Margaret stepped into the kitchen, her face frozen. "Who were you just talking to?" Rick stiffened, avoiding her gaze. "Just Hammond. He still wants to buy Rex. He thinks taking Rex in would be better, help Erina finally move on." Margaret's hand clenched into a fist. "Rex is Erina's whole world. Don't you get that?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. Rick pressed his lips together. "I just want what's best for her. She can't stay stuck like this forever." But Margaret knew, deep down, Rick had never truly accepted Rex, and now, she realized she could no longer fully trust him. Just then, Margaret's phone buzzed, an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. A calm, steady male voice came from the other end. "Mrs. Carter, this is Steve Bennett. We haven't met, but I think you need to hear the truth about Rex, and about James Hammond." That afternoon, as light snow drifted down over the rooftops of Silver Creek, Margaret stepped into the small diner on the corner of town, the place where she had agreed to meet Steve Bennett. He sat at the last booth in the room, tall and weathered, with a calm but knowing gaze. When he saw Margaret, he stood politely and extended a hand. "Thank you for coming." Wasting no time, Margaret sat down quickly, her posture guarded, her eyes carefully sizing up the stranger. Steve got straight to the point. I know you're wondering why I've gotten involved in your family's business. But you need to know, James Hammond doesn't just want Rex for some corporate purpose. Margaret held her breath. Your husband, David, was investigating Meridian Pharmaceuticals before he died. Steve continued, his voice low and gritty. Meridian is involved in illegal chemical operations. My daughter, Jessica Bennett, worked there. She discovered the truth, and 3 weeks later, Jessica died in a suspicious accident. Margaret clenched the edge of her chair. David was following that same trail, Steve said, his eyes darkening. And Max, or Rex, as he's now called, was trained to detect the very chemical compounds Meridian was secretly using. That's why Rex is the final piece Hammond fears most. Margaret was speechless. Each word felt like a blade cutting deeper into her chest. You mean, Hammond's trying to take Rex just to erase the evidence? Steve nodded solemnly. If Rex falls into Hammond's hands, every piece of proof David left behind will be gone forever. A chill ran down Margaret's spine. She thought of Erina, of the little girl curled up silently with Rex every night, and the fear in her heart hardened into a burning resolve. We're not going to let him win, Margaret whispered, as if vowing an oath. Steve placed an old file folder on the table. Inside are the documents Jessica managed to collect, and what David was piecing together before he died. You'll need it, to protect Rex and Erina. Margaret grasped the folder like a treasure. She looked up, locking eyes with Steve, her expression no longer wavering. I will fight. For David, for Erina, for the truth. And in that very moment, within the heart of a mother, the flame of hope ignited fiercer than ever before. Margaret sat alone in the living room, the dim light casting long shadows over the stack of documents Steve Bennett had given her. The papers were yellowed with age, but the truth within them was sharp as a blade. The sound of the phone chiming jolted Margaret from her thoughts. A new email. She opened it, and her heart sank. It was a message from James Hammond's assistant, thanking Rick Thompson for helping to reduce community support for Margaret. Margaret froze. Rick, the man she had once trusted, the one she believed was trying to protect Erina. Her hands trembled with a mix of fury and betrayal. Without hesitation, Margaret stood up and stormed into the kitchen, where Rick stood casually making coffee, his expression calm and unsuspecting. Without a word, she slammed the printed email down on the table. What is this, Rick? Her voice was cold, colder than the snowstorm outside. Rick looked down at the page, his face turning pale. Margaret, I was only trying to help, he muttered weakly. Help? Margaret hissed. By betraying Erina? Her eyes blazed with fury and heartbreak. You think selling out her trust will heal the wounds she's carried for 5 years? Rex is her family. He's the last piece of David still with us. Rick turned away, his voice bitter. I was scared. Scared we'd live in the past forever. Scared Erina would never move on. Margaret clenched her fists. Our past isn't something to erase. It's what Erina needs to survive. The kitchen filled with a heavy silence. After a moment, Rick spoke again, voice hoarse. I was wrong, Margaret, but I want to make it right. I want to stand with you. With Erina. Margaret stared at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod, her eyes still wary. If you truly want to redeem yourself, prove it, with actions, not words. Rick nodded quietly, and in that fragile moment, something like trust, cracked, but not completely broken, wove itself back together between people learning how to protect what mattered most. Upstairs, Erina slept peacefully with her arms around Rex, unaware that her entire world was about to enter the fiercest battle of all, not just to save a dog, but to reclaim memory, loyalty, and a love that would never die. The next day, the sky over Silver Creek was a heavy gray, pressing down on the town like a storm looming on the edge of the horizon. Margaret, Erina, and Rick stood in front of their worn-out old car, bracing themselves for the final, grueling battle at the auction. Rick adjusted Erina's coat collar, his gaze no longer uncertain. He had emptied his last savings and donated it directly to Margaret's fund, one last push to increase their chances of getting Rex back. Erina wore a simple sky blue dress and clutched a cracked porcelain piggy bank to her chest. Inside was everything she had saved over the years, coins, birthday money, every cent of hope she had ever held onto. The drive to the Silver Creek Community Center was silent, tense. Margaret gripped the steering wheel tightly. Erina leaned her forehead against the window, eyes distant. When they arrived, the hall was already packed. Reporters, sponsors, local officials, everyone eager to witness what had come to be known as the town's strangest auction. But Erina had only one goal: Rex. Inside the hall, when Officer Reynolds led Rex in, the German shepherd immediately lifted his head, ears alert. Rex's deep brown eyes scanned the crowd, and locked instantly on Erina. A soft whimper escaped from his throat. His tail stirred gently. Erina bit her lip to hold back tears. She hugged the piggy bank tighter, as if holding on to her entire world. The auction began. Starting bid: $2.500. Margaret raised her paddle. $3.000. Came the next call, from James Hammond, the cold-eyed businessman in a tailored suit, not even bothering to glance at Erina. Steve Bennett, the quiet man with unwavering resolve, entered the bidding. The numbers climbed quickly. $4, $5, $6. Rick placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder, signaling that this was their ceiling. But Margaret didn't flinch. Suddenly, Erina stood up. She stepped into the aisle shyly, raising the cracked piggy bank above her head with both hands. "Please take my money," Erina said, her voice small but clear. "Rex is all I have left of my dad. He's my family." The hall fell completely silent. The piggy bank shattered, spilling coins across the wooden floor, glittering beneath the lights. The bidding grew fierce. $20. Hammond barked. $35. Bennett replied calmly. Hammond, face flushed. $45. At that moment, Rex could take no more. He jerked hard against his leash, pulling Officer Reynolds toward Erina. Before the stunned audience, the old dog knelt before the little girl, burying his head in her arms in a silent vow. There was no more argument to be had. Steve Bennett raised his paddle one last time. $75. No response. Sold. The auctioneer's gavel cracked like thunder, ending the battle in an eruption of applause. Margaret pulled Erina and Rex into her arms, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "They didn't win because of money. They won because of heart." The next morning, pale sunlight streamed through the bare branches, casting a golden hue over Silver Creek's main street. But for Margaret, Erina, and those who supported them, it felt like a storm was looming overhead. At Town Hall, an emergency hearing was being held to decide whether Rex would be allowed to remain with Erina. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. The front rows were packed with journalists, retired officers, neighbors, and curious townsfolk. At the center, Erina sat silently, gripping Rex's leash as if letting go would mean losing her entire world. Margaret sat beside her, eyes resolute. Rick, now firmly on their side, occasionally looked at Erina and gave her encouraging nods. On the opposite side, James Hammond sat tall with his team of attorneys, expression cold and confident, as if victory was already his. Presiding Judge Teresa Blake tapped her gavel softly and opened the session. "We are here today to determine whether K9 Unit Rex may be officially retired and transferred into the care of Margaret Carter and her daughter, Erina." Sheriff Evans took the stand first, his voice weighty. By protocol, a trained K9 of Rex's caliber is extremely difficult to transition into a civilian pet, especially when the prospective handler is a child. Rick stood. He cleared his throat, his voice rough but firm. "I used to object to this. I used to believe Rex was a chain tying Erina to the past. But I was wrong. Rex doesn't hold her back. He helps her find her voice again, find her life again. Separating them now would break them both." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Next, Dr. Martin Winters, a child psychologist, stepped forward. He stated clearly, after years of silence, it was only upon Rex's return that Erina began to communicate, emotionally recover, and express a sense of security. Psychologically, Rex is not simply a dog. He is a living tether connecting Erina to the world. Hammond's lawyers countered. One of them stood, voice sharp and cold. "But can a child, legally underage, be responsible for a former attack-trained animal? This poses a potential threat to public safety." Steve Bennett stepped up. He didn't offer long rebuttals. Instead, he placed a thick folder on the counsel table. Inside are Rex's complete behavioral, training, and mission records, Steve said calmly. There has never been a single incident of unauthorized aggression. Additionally, I've established a trust fund to ensure Rex will continue to be supervised by certified K9 handlers for the rest of his life. All eyes turned toward the file, as if the weight of justice itself rested upon its pages. Finally, Erina was invited to speak. The little girl stood, still holding Rex's leash, but this time, her eyes gleamed. Her voice trembled slightly but rang clear. Rex isn't just a dog. Rex is family. Rex saved my dad. And now, Rex saved me. The room fell silent. Someone in the crowd wiped away tears. And Margaret, though gripping her hands until they turned white, couldn't stop a single tear from sliding down her cheek. After a brief deliberation, Judge Blake announced, given the unique circumstances, the financial assurances provided, and the overwhelming psychological benefit to Erina, this council rules that Rex is hereby transferred into the Carter family's ownership. In addition, Rex shall be formally registered as a certified therapy dog, continuing his service to assist other trauma-affected children in Silver Creek. The courtroom erupted into applause. Margaret embraced Erina tightly. Rex jumped up, burying his head in Erina's chest, tail wagging furiously with silent joy. Rick gripped Margaret's shoulder, offering a rare, sincere smile. In one corner of the room, James Hammond turned pale, quietly packing up his documents and slipping out of the courthouse, utterly defeated. That day, Silver Creek witnessed more than just a legal victory. It witnessed faith triumph over greed. It witnessed a little girl stand tall for love, for memory, and for loyalty. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window panes, casting long golden stripes across the worn wooden floor of the house. Erina sat on the old swing in front of the porch. Rex curled beneath her feet, his warm brown-black fur rising and falling with each steady breath. In her hands was her father's old badge, something she had never let go of since the day he passed. Now, in this moment, the old pain seemed to soften, replaced by a strange but comforting feeling, peace. Inside the house, Margaret leaned against the doorway, quietly watching her daughter. She smiled gently, the first real smile she had felt in years weighed down by loss. Rick approached, holding a small box wrapped in simple paper. She needs a gift to start over, Rick said, his voice warm. Margaret nodded. Together, they stepped out onto the porch. Erina, Margaret called softly. The little girl looked up, her big brown eyes still reflecting the caution of a child who had been hurt. But now, there was a flicker of trust in them. Rick sat beside her and handed her the box. Go on, open it, kiddo. Erina carefully peeled back the wrapping, revealing an old compass inside. The brass rim had tarnished with time, but the north-pointing needle still swung with quiet persistence, defying every storm. It was your father's, Margaret said, her eyes misting. He once told me, when you're lost, just follow your heart, and this compass will help remind you which way that is. Erina clutched the compass tightly, warmth blooming from the small object in her hands. Rex lifted his head and nudged her hand gently, as if to say, that's right, trust yourself. That evening, the town of Silver Creek held a small ceremony in front of the old church. Under soft amber lights, townsfolk gathered. At the center of the square stood a new plaque, honoring Rex, with his picture and a line that read, Rex, the silent guardian, hero of Silver Creek. Erina, dressed in a simple white dress, stepped onto the platform with Margaret and Rick. In her hand was Rex's leash. A round of applause rose, not loud, but gentle, heartfelt, like a shared embrace from the whole town for the little girl and her loyal dog. Steve Bennett came forward last, crouching down to stroke Rex's head. You and Rex won't just carry your father's memory, Erina, he said softly. You'll help others find their light on their darkest days. Erina looked up, eyes glistening. Rex licked her hand lightly. A quiet vow. No matter how long, no matter where, we stay together. That night, back on Margaret's porch, with stars blanketing the sky over Silver Creek, Erina sat leaning against Rex, her fingers gently opening the old compass. The needle quivered, then settled, and inside Erina, for the first time, a steady certainty took root. She had found her way home. Not just to a place, but to a heart. To a family. to the beautiful memories that would never fade. Morning sunlight poured over the playground of Silver Creek Elementary, where the laughter of children echoed in the gentle breeze. In a quiet corner of the yard, Erina sat on a soft mat. Beside her was Rex, now wearing a vest that read, "Therapy dog, companion and friend." Children approached one by one, hesitant at first, but as Rex wagged his tail and lifted his head, his gentle eyes seemed to melt away all their fears. A small girl with bouncy curls knelt beside Rex, her tiny hands trembling as they reached out, then stopped, uncertain. Erina smiled gently. "He's very gentle," she whispered. "If you'd like, you can pet him." And then, with endless patience, Erina witnessed a small miracle. That little hand touched the soft fur, and Rex responded with a tender nuzzle. For many weeks after that, Erina and Rex visited the school, the library, and the community center. They became an inseparable pair in the therapy sessions for children with emotional trauma. No long speeches were needed. No hollow words of comfort. Just a gentle lick, a resting head, a shared breath, and that was enough. One day, as Erina read aloud to a group of children, she suddenly realized she was no longer afraid to speak in front of others. Rex lay quietly beside her, ears perked, listening intently. Erina paused, then whispered softly, "Just for Rex, we've found our new purpose. Haven't we, Rex?" Rex let out a quiet sigh, his tail tapping gently against the floor, a silent but certain reply. That afternoon, as Erina sat with Margaret and Rick on the porch watching the sunset, she opened the old compass in her hands. The needle quivered, then steadied. "Dad used to say," Erina said with a soft smile, her eyes clear, "when you help someone else find their smile, you're finding yourself too." Margaret gently squeezed her daughter's shoulder, and Rick quietly turned away, blinking back the red in his eyes. Their small family sat there, in peace, beneath a sky painted in hues of gold and orange. And somewhere within the soft winds, Rex's slow, steady footsteps beat a silent song, a hymn of loyalty and eternal love. Summer drifted gently through Silver Creek, days painted in golden sunlight and star-strewn nights so serene that most had almost forgotten the shadows of the past. But for Margaret, unease still crept into every breath. One morning, as Erina and Rex were preparing for their therapy session at the community center, an anonymous letter arrived at the house. Inside was a single line, typed in cold, "Some truths are best left buried." Alongside it was an old photograph, David, Erina's father, standing beside Max, Rex's former name, holding the same file Margaret had once discovered, the one tied to Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Margaret sat frozen on the couch, the letter trembling in her hands. Rick entered and his expression shifted instantly when he saw it. "They're still watching us," he muttered, voice hoarse. "Hammond hasn't let go." Margaret nodded silently. They had won the battle for Rex's guardianship. But the truth David had once chased still made powerful people uneasy. That night, after making sure Erina was asleep, Margaret, Rick, and Steve Bennett sat together at the kitchen table, bathed in dim yellow light. "If they're sending warnings, it means they're worried," Bennett said, voice low and steady. "And that means we have a chance." Rick clenched his fist. "But is it worth the risk? What if Erina gets dragged into this?" Margaret lifted her head, eyes blazing with conviction. "We already lost David. I won't let her lose anything else." In the small room upstairs, Erina clutched Rex tightly in her sleep. Outside, shadows gathered, but she slept peacefully, her heart shielded by the steadfast presence of her loyal, four-legged guardian. And in that darkness, Rex remained ever awake, ears twitching, breaths calm, a silent warrior who never truly rested. A greater battle was coming. But this time, they would face it together. The next morning, the sky over Silver Creek hung heavy with gray clouds, as if warning of a day far from peaceful. Margaret, Rick, and Steve Bennett knew they couldn't delay any longer. They brought all the documents concerning Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the evidence David had once gathered, everything Tom Abrams had supplied, to the police station and formally requested an official investigation. At the sheriff's office, Sheriff Evans stared at the file in front of him, his face frozen in a stern expression. "Ms. Margaret," he said slowly, "what you're holding here won't just shake this little town. It could topple a whole corporation." Margaret lifted her head high. Then it's time Justice spoke. She replied, when news leaked that a criminal investigation into Meridian had been launched. James Hammond lashed out. One late evening, while Margaret, Erina, and Rex were playing in their front yard, a black SUV quietly pulled up at the end of the street. From inside, a shadowy figure silently watched. Rex noticed first. His ears perked up, a low growl rumbling from his throat. His gaze locked on the unfamiliar vehicle. Margaret immediately sensed something was wrong. Without hesitation, she brought Erina inside and locked the door, while Rick called the police. By the time Sheriff Evans and the officers arrived, the SUV had vanished into the night. But Margaret knew. They were aware. The day of the official hearing arrived, and Silver Creek was packed with the evidence Bennett had provided, Tom Abrams' testimony, and the files David had left behind. Every line of Hammond's defense crumbled. He and his associates were indicted for tampering with evidence and concealing serious violations of public health safety. The news spread like wildfire. Meridian collapsed, dragging down with it several officials who had once shielded them. A few weeks later, spring finally came to Silver Creek. Wildflowers bloomed in soft purple along the dirt road leading to the house. Erina stepped into the yard, Rex by her side, his coat glowing under the sunlight. She sat down in the grass, wrapped her arms around Rex's neck, and smiled, a true smile. Her first since losing her father. We did it, Rex, she whispered. Dad would be proud of us. Rex wagged his tail, pressing his head gently into Erina's in reply. That afternoon, Margaret, Rick, Erina, and Rex sat beneath the old oak tree in front of their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky gold. No more threats, no more fear, just family, whole and at peace. Margaret gently held Erina's hand, her heart filled with gratitude. The loss had once brought them to their knees. Love, loyalty, and courage had brought them back together. A little girl once silenced by grief, a dog once forgotten, and a small family who had conquered darkness with the light of their hearts. Because, as David once said, Rex can find anything that's been lost, even hope. There are bonds that can't be seen with the eyes, only felt with the heart. Erina and Rex found each other again, found their family, found hope. Through love, loyalty, and courage, they proved that even after the greatest losses, life can always begin anew. Because those who know how to love will always find their way home.